The scent of old parchment and stale bread clung to Sarah Ashford like a second skin. It was the perfume of the invisible, the aroma of those the pack had learned to overlook. She pressed her body flat against the cold stone wall outside Alpha Roderick's war room, her breathing shallow and controlled. The rough granite bit into her cheek, but she did not move, could not move. This moment, this stolen fragment of time, might mean the difference between survival and a shallow grave in the frozen northern woods. Through the crack where ancient mortar had crumbled away, she could see them. Two men, both carved from violence and ambition, standing on opposite sides of a table covered in maps. The firelight turned their faces into shifting masks of shadow and flame. Alpha Roderick was all brutal angles and iron-gray fur that seemed to bristle even in his human form. 50 winters had not softened him. They had only sharpened the edges until he was more weapon than man. His voice, when he spoke, carried the grinding rasp of stones being dragged across each other. The stranger was younger, perhaps 35, with midnight hair pulled back to reveal a face built for command. A silvery scar ran from his left temple down across his cheekbone, the kind of mark that spoke of survival against impossible odds. Sarah had glimpsed him once before, 6 months past, when he had arrived under the banner of truce for what the pack elders called the Treaty Renewal. Kaelan Thornwick, Alpha King of the Stormcrown Territories, the most powerful shifter lord in the northern kingdoms. She had thought him an enemy then. She had been wrong. He was something far more dangerous. Sarah's fingers, raw from scrubbing floors since dawn, traced the rough edge of the crack in the wall. She had discovered this vantage point 18 months ago, back when she still believed that information might buy her freedom, back when she thought escape meant simply running far enough, fast enough. She had been naive then. Now, at 23, she understood that the world beyond Iron Pine Lands was not a sanctuary. It was merely a different cage with different jailers. But she had continued to listen, to watch, to learn, because even if freedom was an illusion, survival was not, and survival required understanding the men who held your life in their calloused hands. Roderick moved to the window, his broad back blocking most of the moonlight. 6 months, Thornwick. 6 months since we signed the treaty, and already your borders press south. My scouts report increased patrols along the freehold frontier. This was not our agreement. Kaelan remained still, his posture relaxed in a way that suggested either supreme confidence or carefully rehearsed indifference. Your scouts see what they expect to see, Roderick. My wolves patrol our own territory. If your men perceive that as aggression, perhaps you should train them to distinguish between defense and offense. A low growl rumbled through the wall. Sarah felt it in her bones. Do not play word games with me, boy. I knew your father. He at least had the honesty to admit when he wanted something. My father, Kaelan said softly, wanted everything and died with nothing. I prefer a different approach. The approach of men who think before they strike. Men who understand that true power is not taken, it is built. Roderick turned back to the table, his massive hands bracing against the dark wood. Then let us speak plainly. The freehold colonies grow bold. They accept deserters, give sanctuary to defectives, spread poison about the old ways being barbaric. If their philosophy spreads, pack structure collapses. Every alpha from here to the southern seas faces the same threat. Sarah's breath caught. The freehold colonies. Neutral territories to the west where humans and wolfless lived, without pack hierarchy, without alphas, without the brutal sorting that determined who mattered and who did not. She had heard whispers of them, fragments of hope carried on the wind, a place where being voiceless was not weakness, where branded skin did not mark you as disposable. She had been planning to run there, had spent every stolen moment for the past year mapping routes, calculating distances, determining how much dried meat she could hide in her threadbare dress before someone noticed the bulge. Kaelan moved to the map, his finger tracing the western border. And you propose what? A unified assault? The freehold has treaties with the coastal kingdoms. Attack them, and we face a war on 3 fronts. Not if we have cause, Roderick countered. Not if they strike first. Steal something valuable, kill someone important. Give us the excuse we need, and the coastal kingdoms will stay neutral. They will not risk their trade routes for a handful of territories that traffic in sedition. The silence that followed was thick enough to choke on. Sarah's heart hammered against her ribs so hard she was certain they could hear it through the wall. This was not politics. This was conspiracy. They were planning to manufacture a war. "You would need something significant," Kaelan said finally. "Something that would justify full-scale retaliation without appearing genocidal." Roderick's smile was all teeth. "I have something. Someone, rather. A branded Omega, wolfless, defective, the kind of creature the Freehold claims to protect. If she were to escape during a scheduled execution and make her way to Freehold territory, we could claim they orchestrated a theft of pack property, an act of war by any measure." Sarah's blood turned to ice. "The details," Kaelan said, and his voice held a new edge, something sharper than curiosity. "Sarah Ashford, 23. Mute since childhood when raiders killed her mother. No wolf spirit, no voice, no value except as a cautionary tale. I plan to mate her to one of my betas, but she has proven recalcitrant. During the next blood moon, I will hold a public execution. She will be cast from Reaver's Edge into the sea. You will have men positioned to intercept her body, stage evidence of Freehold involvement. Clean, simple, effective." "And if she dies in the fall?" Kaelan asked. "Then we lose nothing but a defective Omega, and I find another catalyst. But I suspect she will survive. The tides are strong beneath Reaver's Edge, and she has been seen at the river, watching the currents. She is cleverer than she pretends." There was something in Roderick's voice then. Not admiration, more like the satisfaction of a hunter who has watched his prey long enough to predict its every move. Kaelan was quiet for a long moment. "When do you plan this execution?" "The blood moon rises in 3 weeks. You have until then to position your agents. I will provide the schedule, the guard rotations, the precise time she will be thrown. All you need do is be ready to catch her, and then break her. Extract every scrap of information she has gathered. The girl is more observant than her silence suggests. She may prove useful beyond her role as casus belli." Sarah did not remember backing away from the wall, did not remember the cold sweat that drenched her thin dress or the way her bare feet made no sound on the stone as she fled down the narrow servants' corridor. Her mind was a white roar of betrayal and terror and something else, something darker and more dangerous than fear. They thought her clever. They thought her a tool to be sharpened and aimed at their enemies. They had no idea how right they were. The next 3 weeks passed in a fever of preparation, disguised as resignation. Sarah returned to her place among the Omega servants, moving through her duties with the same mechanical obedience she had shown for years. She scrubbed floors and hauled water, and kept her gaze downcast while her mind worked like the gears of some vast, intricate machine. The tides. Everything depended on understanding the tides. The Iron Pine Pack controlled a stretch of brutal coastline where black cliffs rose 300 feet above the churning sea. Reaver's Edge, they called it. The place where traitors and defectives were returned to the elements. The rocks below were jagged and unforgiving, stained dark with old blood and the promise of new violence. But Sarah had grown up on stories of the sea. Her mother, before the raiders came, had taught her to read the rhythm of waves, to understand the language of wind and current. Those lessons, preserved in memory like insects in amber, were all she had left of the woman who had died with a knife in her back while her daughter watched, voiceless, from beneath a table. She stole moments when she could, slipping away during the brief window between evening meal preparation and the lighting of the night fires. The cliff face was not uniform. There were outcroppings, shelves of stone worn smooth by centuries of salt spray. And 15 feet to the west of the formal execution site, hidden from view unless you knew to look for it, the rocks gave way to a deep channel, a place where the water ran dark and fast and deep enough to swallow a body without shattering it first. Sarah measured the tides. She watched the moon wax toward fullness. She calculated angles and distances with the methodical precision of someone for whom failure meant death, because that was what this was, war, her war, and she would be damned twice over if she let them turn her into their weapon. She also learned to hold her breath. Every morning, before the pack stirred, she would slip down to the river that fed into the sea. The water was so cold, it felt like knives against her skin, but she forced herself under again and again. 30 seconds, 1 minute, 2 minutes, 3. By the end of the second week, she could stay submerged for nearly 4 minutes, her lungs burning but her mind calm. It would have to be enough. The supplies were harder, food that would not spoil, a water skin, flint and steel wrapped in oiled cloth, a knife small enough to hide but large enough to be useful. She stole them piece by piece, item by item, squirreling them away in a cave she had discovered years ago. A small hollow in the cliff face, accessible only at low tide, hidden behind a curtain of seawater and spray. The pack would find the cache eventually, but by then, it would not matter. By then, she would be dead or free. And dead on her terms was still better than whatever fate Roderick and Thornwick had planned. The third piece of her survival plan was the most delicate. It required making herself visible in exactly the right way, putting herself in position to be used. Garrett Stone had been watching her with increasing intensity for nearly 6 months. He was handsome in the way of brutal things, all sharp edges and predatory grace. Cold eyes that tracked her movements whenever they were in the same space. The other Omegas whispered that he had chosen her, that Alpha Roderick approved the match, that she should be grateful a beta of his standing would claim a wolfless mute. Sarah knew better. She had seen the way he looked at her, not with desire, with possession, like she was a puzzle he wanted to take apart to see how the pieces worked, like her voicelessness made her the perfect receptacle for whatever darkness lived inside him. She had avoided him successfully for months, but now, with the blood moon approaching and her death sentence already written, she stopped running. It was easy to arrange. She simply went to the river alone, at dusk. When the mist rose off the water and the light turned golden and uncertain, she knew he would follow. Men like Garrett always followed. He found her at the shallow bend where smooth stones emerged from the current like the humped backs of sleeping giants. She was kneeling, her hands in the icy water, pretending to wash a bundle of clothes. She heard his approach but did not turn, did not acknowledge him, let him think she was unaware. "Sarah." His voice was warm honey over broken glass. "Alone again. You make it so easy." She turned then, slowly, her face arranged in an expression of carefully calibrated fear. It was not difficult. Most of it was real. Garrett moved closer, his boots loud on the stones. "You have been avoiding me. That is unwise. An Omega needs protection, needs a mate who can provide, who can shield her from the harshness of pack judgment. I could be that for you. All you need do is accept." Sarah remained still. Every instinct screamed at her to run, but she forced herself to stay, to play the role a little longer, just long enough. His hand shot out faster than she expected, catching her wrist in a grip that ground the small bones together. "I have been patient," he continued, and now his voice had lost all pretense of warmth. "But my patience has limits. The Alpha has given his blessing. You will be mine, Sarah. Whether you accept it willingly or not is merely a question of how much pain we both endure first." She tried to pull away. He tightened his grip, dragging her toward him. His other hand came up to cup her face, his thumb pressing hard enough to bruise. "There, that is better. I prefer you compliant. That sharp mind of yours might cause problems later, but I will enjoy educating you on the proper way a mate should behave." Sarah's hand, the one hidden in the folds of her wet dress, found the smooth river stone she had selected hours ago. It was the size of an egg, heavy and dense and perfect. She slammed it into the side of his head with every ounce of strength she possessed. Garrett staggered, his grip loosening. She did not wait to see if he would recover. She hit him again and again. Blood, dark in the fading light, streamed down his face. He roared, the sound half human and half wolf, and lunged at her. Sarah threw herself sideways. She was smaller, lighter, fueled by desperation and rage. She did not fight fair. There was no fairness in survival. She clawed at his eyes, her nails leaving long red furrows in his skin. She kicked at his knees, his groin, any vulnerable point she could reach. And when he tried to pin her against the water-smoothed rocks, she gave him one final shove, hard enough to send him stumbling backward into the deep channel where the current ran fastest. The last thing she saw before she ran was his face, twisted in fury and shock as the water pulled him downstream. It was not enough to kill him. The river was not that deep, and he was a beta, strong and hard to break. But it was enough to hurt him, enough to humiliate him, enough to give Roderick the excuse he needed to proclaim her defiant, dangerous, worthy of execution. She returned to the Omega Den with blood under her fingernails and her dress torn and her voicelessness absolute. The Pack Council convened the next day. They held the trial, if it could be called such, in the Great Hall, a cavernous space of ancient timber and cold stone where the pack gathered for judgments and celebrations. The rafters above were lost in shadow. The floor below was packed earth, worn smooth by countless feet over countless years. Sarah knelt in the center of it all, her wrists bound with rough hemp that bit into her skin. Around her, the pack formed a living wall. 200 wolves, their awareness prickling against her like physical touch, their collective presence a suffocating weight of judgment. Alpha Roderick stood on the raised dais at the far end of the hall, flanked by his advisors and his mate, a hard-faced woman with silver streaking her dark hair. Garrett stood to his right, his face freshly healed, but the scratches Sarah had given him still visible, angry red lines that marked him as a man who had been bested by a wolfless Omega. The shame of it hung on him like a cloak. Sarah could see it in the rigid set of his shoulders, the way his jaw clenched so hard she thought his teeth might crack. He wanted her dead, not just dead, destroyed, made an example so brutal that no other Omega would dare raise a hand to her betters. Roderick's voice filled the hall, a booming pronouncement that needed no amplification. Sarah Ashford, you stand accused of striking a beta, of rejecting a sanctioned mating, of defying the will of this pack and the judgment of your alpha. How do you answer these charges? Sarah said nothing, could say nothing. Her voice had died 20 years ago, choked on the screams that had never found air while her mother bled out 3 feet away. But her voicelessness now was more than trauma. It was strategy. Let them see what they expected. A broken thing, a creature without will or agency. Let them underestimate her one final time. The silence stretched. Someone in the crowd laughed, a harsh bark of sound. Another voice called out for her to beg, to grovel, to show proper remorse. Sarah lifted her head and looked directly at Garrett. Then slowly, deliberately, she smiled. It was a small expression, fleeting, but it held every ounce of her contempt, her defiance, her absolute refusal to give him the satisfaction of her fear. In that moment, she was not kneeling. She was standing on the cliff's edge, choosing her fall, owning her ending. Garrett lunged forward, his control snapping like a dried branch. Insolent bitch! She has no remorse, no shame. She would rather die than accept her place. Roderick held up one massive hand. Enough. The judgment is clear. For the crime of violence against a beta, for the rejection of a sanctioned mate, for defiance of pack law, Sarah Ashford is condemned. She will be cast from Reaver's Edge at the height of the blood moon. Let the sea judge her. Let her body feed the waves. This is my word. This is pack law. The hall erupted in howls of approval. The sound was deafening, a wall of noise that pressed against Sarah's skull like physical force. She closed her eyes and thought of the deep channel, of the supplies hidden in the cave, of the ocean current that would carry her south if she could just survive the fall. 3 more days. She had 3 more days to prepare. They kept her locked in a stone cell beneath the great hall for the remaining time. It was small and dark and bitterly cold, but Sarah welcomed it. Here, alone with her thoughts, she could plan without interruption, could rehearse every movement she would need to make. Food came twice a day, passed through a slot in the iron door by silent guards who did not meet her eyes. She ate it all, forcing down every bite, even when her stomach rebelled. She would need every ounce of strength, could afford no weakness. On the final night, she did not sleep. Instead, she sat with her back against the wall and thought about her mother. Not the death, not the blood and the screams and the terrible silence that followed, but the woman before, the one who had taught her to read the tides, to find north by the stars, to survive in a world that did not value survival. If you are ever drowning, her mother had said once, do not fight the current. Go with it. Let it carry you. Save your strength for when you find the shore. Sarah had thought it was advice about swimming. Now she understood it was advice about life. The blood moon rose heavy and red above the cliffs of Reaver's Edge. It was larger than any moon Sarah had ever seen, so close it seemed she could reach up and touch it. The light it cast was the color of rust and old wounds, painting the world in shades of violence. Below, the sea was a living thing, a dark beast that threw itself against the rocks with a sound like thunder, sending spray high enough to kiss the cliff's edge. The water was black except where the moonlight touched it, turning the foam to something like blood. They brought her to the edge in chains, not because they feared she would run, there was nowhere to run, but because the spectacle demanded it. The entire pack had gathered, a sea of faces and watchful presences. They wanted to witness, needed to witness. This was what happened to those who forgot their place. Alpha Roderick stood at the formal execution site, exactly where Sarah had known he would. The spot was marked by ancient stones worn smooth by ceremony and time. It jutted out slightly, a natural platform that offered the best view of the fall. 15 feet to the west, hidden in shadow, was the outcropping that led to the deep channel. Sarah marked it with her eyes, memorizing the angle, the distance, the timing she would need. Roderick's voice cut through the wind. "Sarah Ashford, you have been judged and found wanting. This pack has no place for defectives who cannot submit, for creatures who raise their hands against their betters. You chose defiance. Now you will choose how you fall." He gestured to the guards flanking her. They removed the chains but kept their hands on her arms, ready to drag her to the edge if she resisted. Sarah did not resist. She walked forward on her own, her bare feet silent on the cold stone. She walked until she stood at the very edge of the world, with nothing but 300 feet of empty air and hungry rocks between her and the sea. Behind her she heard Garrett's voice, thick with satisfaction. At last, some justice. Sarah turned her head just enough to look back at them. At Roderick with his iron certainty, at Garrett with his petty vindictiveness, at the pack that had marked her, used her, and now discarded her like refuse. And she smiled again. That same small, fleeting expression. But this time, it held something new. Not contempt, not defiance, but a kind of dark, terrible joy. Because they thought they were executing her. They thought they held her life in their hands, the power to give or take at their pleasure. They were wrong. Sarah turned back to the sea. She did not wait for Garrett's hands on her shoulders, did not give him the satisfaction of the push. Instead, she took one step back, then another, measuring, calculating, and then she ran. 3 strides to build momentum, a 4th to plant her foot at the very edge of the outcropping, and on the 5th, she launched herself into the void, her body arcing out and west, away from the killing rocks and toward the deep channel she had mapped in her mind. The wind screamed. The world became a blur of red light and black water. For one perfect, crystalline moment, she was flying, weightless, free. Then gravity remembered her, and she fell. The impact, when it came, was not the shattering collision with stone she had feared. It was water, cold enough to stop her heart, hitting her like a fist. The breath exploded from her lungs. The world became black in pressure, and the burning need to surface, to breathe, to live. But Sarah did not surface. She fought every instinct that screamed at her to kick upward, to find air. Instead, she went deeper, letting the current take her, letting it pull her away from the cliff and the pack and the life that had tried to break her. Her lungs burned. Her vision narrowed to a pinpoint. She counted heartbeats. 10. 20, 30. When she reached 60, she would allow herself to surface, not before. At 58, something massive wrapped around her ankle and dragged her sideways through the water. For one terrible moment, Sarah thought it was a shark, some deep-dwelling predator drawn by the scent of blood and fear. She kicked wildly, her survival instinct overriding strategy. The grip tightened, and then she was being hauled upward with impossible strength, breaking the surface in an explosion of spray and gasping breaths. Strong arms pulled her against a chest as solid as the cliffs she had just escaped. A voice, deep and controlled, spoke near her ear. "Be still, I have you." Sarah's vision cleared enough to see where she was. A small boat, narrow and sleek, designed for speed rather than cargo. It had been hidden in the sea cave just 50 yards from the cliff's base. And standing above her, water streaming from his dark hair and those strange amber eyes burning with an intensity that had nothing to do with the moon, was Kaelan Thornwick. He had been waiting, had known exactly where she would land, had positioned himself to intercept her the moment she hit the water. Every word she had overheard, every piece of the conspiracy, all of it was true. Sarah's heart, which had just begun to slow from the shock of the fall, kicked into a frantic rhythm. She tried to pull away, to throw herself back into the water, to take her chances with the sea rather than whatever he had planned. His arms were iron. "You survived." "Good. That makes the next part easier." He lifted her as if she weighed nothing, depositing her in the bottom of the boat. She landed hard, the impact driving what little air she had regained from her lungs. By the time she could move again, he was already rowing, the oars cutting through the water with smooth, powerful strokes that carried them rapidly away from the cliff and into the deeper darkness beyond. Sarah pushed herself up on shaking arms. Her body was already beginning to rebel against the cold, violent shivers racking her frame. But her mind was clear, sharp, already working on the next problem, the next survival calculation. Kaelan did not look at her as he rowed. His focus was entirely on the water, on the rhythm of the oars, on putting distance between them and Iron Pine territory. But after several minutes, he spoke again. "You are cleverer than Roderick believes. That was not the jump of someone resigned to death. That was strategy." Sarah said nothing. There was nothing to say, no words that would change her situation. She was in a boat with an Alpha King who had conspired to use her as a weapon against innocence. The fact that he had saved her life meant nothing. It only meant he needed her alive. For now. "I heard your heartbeat," he continued, "when you were underwater. You were not panicking. You were counting, conserving air, swimming with the current rather than against it. Impressive discipline for someone who has never had formal survival training." He turned his head then, studying her in the darkness. "And then you smiled at them before you jumped. I saw it, even from the cave. You smiled like someone who had just won a victory they did not know they were fighting." Sarah held his gaze. Let him see the intelligence there, the calculation. There was no point in pretending now. He knew what she was, what she had always been beneath the submissive posture. "We are going to have an interesting conversation when we reach Stormcrown," Kaelan said. He returned his attention to the water, but there was something new in his voice, not warmth, but a kind of cold respect. "I need to know what you heard, what you know. And you, I suspect, need to know whether I am a better devil than the one you just escaped." The boat cut through the black water, carrying Sarah away from one prison and toward another. She was cold, exhausted, trapped with a man who had orchestrated her execution and now held her life in his hands for the second time that night. But she was also alive, and as long as she was alive, she could plan, could calculate, could survive. The blood moon hung above them, vast and merciless, illuminating the path ahead, toward the Stormcrown territories, toward whatever new game Kaelan Thornwick was playing, toward a future that Sarah Ashford would write with her own hands, one careful move at a time. The shore of the Stormcrown territories emerged from the darkness like the edge of another world. No sandy beaches here, just more cliffs, though these were dark granite rather than the black basalt of Iron Pine lands, and they rose in terraced levels like the steps of some ancient sleeping god. Pine forests, thick and primordial, crowned the heights. The scent of them drifted down on the wind, sharp and clean and nothing like home. Kaelan guided the boat into a narrow inlet between two massive rock formations. The water here was calmer, protected from the worst of the ocean's fury. As they approached, Sarah saw the dark mouth of another cave, this one large enough to swallow the boat whole. He rowed them inside. The sound changed immediately, becoming hollow and echoing. Somewhere in the darkness, water dripped with the steady patience of centuries. After several moments, Sarah's eyes adjusted enough to see a rough dock carved into the stone, and beyond it, a tunnel leading upward into the cliff itself. Kaelan secured the boat with practiced efficiency. When he turned back to her, his face was unreadable in the dim light. "Can you walk?" Sarah nodded. Her body was a symphony of pain, bruises blooming where the water had hit her, muscles screaming from the cold and exertion. But she could walk. She would crawl through broken glass before she showed weakness to this man. "Then follow. And do not attempt to run. We are 10 miles from the nearest territory that is not mine, and the forests here are not kind to those who wander without knowledge of their ways." He moved toward the tunnel without waiting to see if she obeyed. Sarah considered, briefly, staying in the boat, simply refusing to follow. But to what end? She was in unknown territory with no supplies, no allies, no plan beyond the vague hope of reaching the freehold colonies. And there was something else, a hard, cold kernel of curiosity in her chest. She needed to know what Kaelan Thornwick wanted. needed to understand the shape of the trap before she could find the escape. She followed. The tunnel was narrow enough that her shoulders nearly brushed both walls. It angled sharply upward, carved into the living rock by hands that must have worked for years. Every 20 feet, a small alcove held a lamp, the flames protected behind thick glass. Their light was minimal, but enough to see by. Kaelan climbed with the easy confidence of someone who had made this journey 1,000 times. Sarah struggled to keep pace, her bare feet slipping on the damp stone. But she did not ask him to slow, did not ask for help, just focused on putting one foot in front of the other, on not collapsing until she understood where this path led. After what felt like an hour, but was probably only 20 minutes, the tunnel opened into a chamber. It was not large, perhaps 15 feet across, but it had clearly been designed as a waypoint. There were benches carved into the walls, a small brazier in the center, currently cold, and in the far corner, a chest made of dark wood. Kaelan went to the chest and opened it. From inside, he pulled a thick wool cloak the color of charcoal. He crossed to Sarah and held it out. "You are shaking. This will help." Sarah stared at the cloak, then at him, making no move to take it. "I am not going to hurt you," he said. His voice was level. "Matter of fact, if I intended violence, I would have left you to the rocks. Take the cloak. Hypothermia serves neither of us." Slowly, Sarah reached out and took the offered garment. It was heavy and soft, and still held warmth from whatever the chest had been insulated with. She wrapped it around her shoulders, and despite her best efforts, a small sound escaped her. Not quite a sigh, just a breath of relief as heat began to seep back into her frozen body. "Better?" Kaelan asked. Sarah met his eyes and nodded once, a sharp, economical movement. "Good. We have another hour of walking before we reach the fortress. The path gets easier from here, but if you need to rest, signal me." He paused. His expression shifted, something almost like dark amusement crossing his features. "I am aware you do not speak." Sarah's jaw tightened. He was baiting her, trying to see if she would react, prove that her voicelessness was choice rather than inability. She kept her expression neutral and gestured toward the tunnel exit. A clear message: keep moving. Kaelan's smile was brief but genuine. "As you wish." They climbed in silence. The path became a staircase, the steps worn smooth in the center where countless feet had tread over countless years. Eventually, the tunnel opened onto a narrow trail carved into the cliff face, a thin sliver of stone with the forest above and a very long fall below. The blood moon had set while they were underground. Now only starlight remained, vast and cold and impossibly bright this far from human habitation. Sarah looked up and saw constellations she had only read about in stolen books. The hunter, the crown, the wolf's eye. "Beautiful, is it not?" Kaelan's voice came from ahead of her. "Men forget sometimes how large the world is, how small we are by comparison. It is a useful perspective, keeps the ego in check." Sarah said nothing, but she wondered if he knew how false that humility sounded, coming from an alpha king who had just orchestrated an innocent woman's execution to manufacture a war. The fortress appeared without warning. One moment, there was only forest and stone. The next, the trees parted to reveal walls. Not the rough timber palisades of iron pine, but massive granite blocks fitted together with such precision that no mortar showed between them. They rose 40 feet high and were topped with battlements where Sarah could see the silhouettes of guards moving against the stars. This was not a home. It was a statement. A declaration that whoever ruled here intended to do so for a very, very long time. Kaelan led her to a postern gate set into the base of the eastern wall. He knocked once, a specific rhythm. The gate opened immediately, revealing a guard in dark leather armor. The man's eyes widened when he saw Sarah, but he said nothing, simply stepped aside and let them pass. Inside the walls was a courtyard, and beyond that, the keep itself. A massive structure of the same dark granite, 5 stories tall with narrow windows and towers that pierced the night sky like accusing fingers. Torches burned in iron sconces, casting dancing shadows across the worn cobblestones. They encountered more guards as they crossed the courtyard, more servants hurrying about late-night tasks. All of them stopped when they saw their king. All of them stared at the dripping, bruised woman wrapped in his cloak walking at his side. None of them questioned. That, perhaps, told Sarah more about Kaelan Thornwick than anything else. This was a man whose word was absolute, whose decisions were not debated. He led her through corridors of cold stone and up a winding staircase. Finally, they stopped before a heavy oak door. Kaelan pushed it open and gestured for her to enter. The room beyond stole what little breath Sarah had remaining. It was larger than the entire Omega Den at Iron Pine. A bed dominated one wall, piled high with furs and blankets. A fireplace, already lit, crackled merrily and filled the space with warmth. There was a table with 2 chairs, a wardrobe, a washstand with a porcelain basin and pitcher, even a window, tall and narrow, offering a view of the forest beyond the walls. "This will be your chamber," Kaelan said. "Food will be brought shortly. Clean clothes are in the wardrobe. You may wash and rest. Tomorrow we talk." Sarah turned to look at him, her expression carefully neutral. But her mind was racing. This room was too fine, too comfortable. This was not a cell, but it was not freedom either. Kaelan seemed to read her thoughts. The door locks from the outside. "Do not mistake comfort for trust. You are here because you are useful. When I determine you are no longer a threat, we will discuss what comes next." He moved to leave, then paused in the doorway, turning back one final time. "For what it is worth, I am sorry it came to this. There were other paths, other ways this could have unfolded. But we work with the world as it is, not as we wish it to be." With that, he left. The door closed behind him with a soft click. A moment later, Sarah heard the distinct sound of a key turning in the lock. She stood in the center of the room for a long moment, dripping on the expensive rug, her body shaking with cold and exhaustion, and something darker. Rage, perhaps, or the bitter understanding that she had escaped one cage only to find another waiting. But this cage had a fire, and clean clothes, and the promise of food. Sarah walked to the window and looked out at the vast forest beyond. Somewhere out there, miles away across impossible terrain, the freehold colonies still waited. Freedom still existed. She just had to survive long enough to reach it. Behind her, the fire crackled. Outside, an owl called, the sound echoing through the darkness like a warning, or perhaps a promise. Tomorrow, Kaelan had said, they would talk. Tomorrow, he would try to break her, try to extract whatever intelligence he believed she possessed. Sarah touched the glass, her fingers leaving prints on the cold surface. He thought her useful, thought her a tool he could sharpen and wield. He had no idea what he had really captured, and by the time he figured it out, it would be far, far too late. Dawn came to the storm-crowned territories like a blade drawn slowly across the throat of night. Sarah watched it from her window, standing where she had stood for most of the hours since Kaelan had locked her in this gilded cage. The sky bled from black to deep purple to a violent orange that set the clouds aflame. It was beautiful in the way that dangerous things often were, beautiful and terrible and utterly indifferent to the small human concerns playing out beneath it. She had not slept. Her body screamed for rest, every muscle a symphony of pain from the fall in the cold water and the long climb through the stone tunnels. But her mind would not quiet, could not quiet. There was too much to process, too many variables to calculate. The room had revealed its secrets slowly through the night. The wardrobe held clothes as Kaelan had promised. Simple garments of good quality, wool tunics in shades of gray and green, leather leggings, soft boots lined with fur, everything precisely her size, which meant either remarkable luck or disturbing foresight. The food had arrived an hour after Kaelan left, not delivered by a servant, but by an old woman with steel-gray hair pulled back in a severe bun. She had entered without knocking, the key turning in the lock with the confidence of someone who had done this many times before. Her eyes, the color of winter ice, had swept over Sarah with an assessing gaze that missed nothing. The bruises, the way Sarah stood with her weight balanced on the balls of her feet, ready to move. The faint trembling in her hands that spoke of exhaustion held at bay through sheer will. The woman had set the tray on the table without a word, bread still warm from the oven, thick stew rich with meat and root vegetables, a clay mug of something that smelled of honey and herbs. Then she had left, locking the door behind her, the entire interaction conducted in absolute stillness. Sarah had stared at the food for a long time. Hunger was a living thing inside her, clawing at her belly, making her mouth water despite her better judgment. But food from your captor was never just food. It was an offering, an attempt to create obligation, the first small step in a process designed to make you grateful. compliant, willing to trade your resistance for basic comfort. She had eaten it anyway, every bite, because starving herself would be a slow, stupid form of suicide, and she had not survived the fall from Reaver's Edge just to die of stubbornness in a locked room. Now, as the sun finally crested the eastern mountains and flooded the world with cold morning light, Sarah heard footsteps in the corridor outside. Not the measured tread of a guard, something lighter, more purposeful. The lock turned, the door opened. The same old woman from the night before entered, this time carrying a bundle of fresh linens. She moved to the washstand and began laying out towels with the efficiency of long practice. Sarah watched her, cataloging details. The woman's hands were gnarled with age but steady. No tremor, no hesitation. Her movements held the kind of economy that spoke of decades spent in service. But there was something else, too. A quality to her wordlessness that felt less like deference and more like choice. The woman finished her task and turned to face Sarah directly. For a long moment, they simply looked at each other. Two women who did not speak, separated by age and circumstance, and the vast gulf between prisoner and servant. Then the old woman reached into the pocket of her plain gray dress and pulled out a small piece of folded parchment. She held it out, her expression unreadable. Sarah crossed the room slowly, took the offered paper, unfolded it with careful fingers. The message was written in a neat, precise hand. He tests loyalty through survival. Those who endure earn place. Those who break are discarded. Trust actions, not words. Sarah looked up sharply. The old woman's face remained neutral, but there was something in her eyes. Not sympathy, not warning, just a flat, factual acknowledgement of reality. Before Sarah could react, could try to communicate a question, the woman turned and left. The door locked behind her once more. Sarah was alone with the note and the implications it carried. She read it 3 more times. Then, very carefully, she tore the parchment into tiny pieces and dropped them into the fire. Watched them curl and blacken and turn to ash. If the old woman had taken the risk of passing that message, it meant others had been in this room before. Others who Kaelan had tested. The question was whether they had endured or broken. And what happened to those who failed? Kaelan came for her 2 hours later. He entered without knocking, though she heard the key in the lock moments before and had time to position herself by the window, back straight, face composed, giving him nothing. He had changed from his wet traveling clothes into the garments of a king. Not ceremonial, nothing so obvious. But the dark leather vest was tooled with subtle patterns that might have been decorative or might have been sigils of power. The tunic beneath was fine spun wool, dyed the color of storm clouds. His hair, black as a raven's wing, was pulled back from his face, revealing the sharp angles of his features and the silvered scar that marked his survival. "You look rested," he said. It was not a question, simply an observation delivered in that same level, controlled tone he seemed to favor. Sarah said nothing, showed nothing, just watched him with the same flat assessment he was giving her. "Good. Then we can begin." He gestured toward the table where the remains of her breakfast still sat. "Sit. We have much to discuss." Sarah considered refusing, considered maintaining her position by the window, forcing him to either physically move her or conduct this conversation on unequal footing. But tactical advantage had to be weighed against the cost of claiming it. And right now, she needed information more than she needed to demonstrate defiance. She moved to the table, sat, folded her hands in her lap, and waited. Kaelan took the chair opposite her. For a moment, he simply looked at her. Really looked. Not the way Garrett had looked, with that possessive hunger that reduced her to an object to be claimed. This was different. Colder, more analytical. He was taking her measure the way a general might assess an enemy commander before battle. "I need to know what you overheard," he said finally. "How much of the conversation between myself and Roderick reached your ears? Do not attempt to lie. I will know." Sarah held his gaze and did nothing, said nothing. Let the quiet stretch between them like a drawn blade. Kaelan leaned back in his chair. "You are wondering if this wordlessness is still your best weapon, calculating whether cooperation might buy you leverage or simply confirm your value as a prisoner." He paused. "The answer, in case you are curious, is both. Your cooperation has value, but so does your intelligence. The fact that you survived a 300-foot fall through strategic planning rather than luck tells me you are worth more than Roderick ever understood." He was trying to flatter her, appeal to her ego, make her feel seen. It was a sophisticated approach, more dangerous than simple threats because it offered something she had been starved of her entire life: recognition. Sarah reached for the slate and chalk that had been left on the table beside the breakfast tray. She wrote 3 words in clear, bold letters, then turned the slate so he could read it. "What do you want?" Kaelan smiled. It was a brief expression, there and gone like sunlight through fast-moving clouds, but it transformed his face for that instant from cold assessment to something almost human. Direct, efficient. I appreciate that. He leaned forward, his elbows on the table. "What I want is information. Roderick is a brute, but he is not a fool. He has held Iron Pine territory for 30 years through a combination of ruthlessness and cunning. I need to know his weaknesses, his supply lines, his alliances, the internal structure of his pack. You lived among them for 23 years. You observed. You listened. You know things that my scouts could spend months trying to learn." Sarah wrote again. "Why should I help you conquer my birth pack?" "Because they are not your pack," Kaelan said flatly. "They branded you, cast you out, threw you from a cliff to drown. Whatever loyalty you might have felt died the moment Roderick pronounced your sentence. And because," he continued, leaning back once more, "you have no other options. You are in my territory, under my authority. You can choose to cooperate and be treated as a valuable consultant, or you can choose wordlessness and be treated as a potential threat. The quality of your captivity is entirely within your control." It was well played. The illusion of choice wrapped around what was fundamentally a threat: comply or suffer, but dressed up in reasonable language that made it sound like partnership. Sarah considered him for a long moment. Then she began to write. The chalk made soft scratching sounds against the slate, the only noise in the room beyond the crackle of the fire and the distant call of ravens outside the window. When she finished, she turned the slate toward him. "I will answer 3 questions. In exchange, you answer 3 of mine. Truth for truth. Prove you can be honest, and I will consider further cooperation." Kaelan read the message. Something shifted in his expression. Not quite respect, but perhaps the recognition that he was dealing with an opponent rather than a victim. "Agreed," he said. "Ask your questions first. I will answer truthfully. Then you will answer mine." Sarah erased the slate and wrote her first question. "Did you plan my execution with Roderick?" "Yes," Kaelan said without hesitation. 6 months ago, my scouts reported increased activity near the freehold borders. Deserters fleeing pack territories, refugees seeking asylum. It was becoming a political problem. The coastal kingdoms that trade with the freehold were using it as leverage in negotiations. I needed cause to act without appearing to be the aggressor. Roderick offered a solution. A branded Omega executed publicly, evidence planted to suggest freehold involvement. It would give both our packs justification for coordinated military action. The casual way he admitted it was almost worse than the confession itself. He spoke of engineering her death the way another man might discuss crop rotations or trade agreements, a problem to be solved, a tool to be employed. Sarah's jaw tightened, but she forced her hand steady as she wrote the second question. "Why did you save me instead of letting me die?" "That one," Kaelan said slowly, "is more complicated. The plan was for you to jump, for my men to recover your body and stage evidence. But when I saw you position yourself, when I watched you calculate the angle and the timing, I realized you were not attempting suicide. You were attempting escape." He paused, and I became curious about what kind of mind could plan that carefully under such pressure. Curious about what else you might have observed. Curious about what you might be worth alive rather than dead. "So I was an investment," Sarah wrote, "not a rescue." Kaelan's expression did not change. "Yes, though I will note that investment and rescue are not mutually exclusive. You are alive. That counts for something." Sarah stared at him, at the calm certainty in his face, the absolute absence of guilt or shame. He was not a good man, but he was perhaps an honest one, at least in this moment. She wrote her third question. "What happens to me when I am no longer useful?" "That," Kaelan said, "depends entirely on how you define useful. If your value is purely informational, then yes, there will come a point when you have nothing left to offer. But I suspect your value extends beyond what you know about Iron Pine. You survived impossible odds through planning and discipline. You are clever, ruthless when necessary, and capable of strategic thinking under extreme pressure. Those qualities do not depreciate. He leaned forward again. So to answer your question, what happens when you are no longer useful as an intelligence source is that you become useful in other ways. As an advisor, as a strategist, as someone who understands how to survive in a world designed to crush people like you. He held her gaze. Or you can choose to leave. Take supplies and an escort to any border you wish. The freehold colonies, if that is still your goal. I will not stop you, but I think we both know you will stay. Why would I stay, Sarah wrote. Because you want revenge, Kaelan said simply. You want to watch Iron Pine burn. You want Roderick to answer for what he did to you, and I am the only one with the power to make that happen. He was right. Sarah hated that he was right, but the bitter truth settled in her stomach like a stone. She did want revenge, wanted it with a fierce, hot intensity that frightened her. My turn, Kaelan said. First question. You positioned yourself 15 feet west of the execution site. You aimed for the deep channel rather than the killing rocks. How did you know it was there? Sarah wrote. I studied the tides for 2 years, watched the water patterns, mapped the currents. I knew every feature of that coastline better than the fishermen who worked it daily. Kaelan nodded slowly. Second question. You fought Garrett Stone by the river, injured him badly enough that he could justify your execution to the pack. Was that calculated or instinctive? Calculated, Sarah wrote. I needed witnesses, needed evidence of defiance, needed to ensure the execution would happen exactly when and where Roderick planned it, because I knew you would be waiting. The stillness that followed that admission was heavy. Kaelan's expression shifted. Not quite surprise, more like the recalibration of expectations. He had thought her a clever opportunist. Now he was beginning to understand she was a strategist who had played a longer game than he had anticipated. You knew I would be there, he said, not a question, a realization. I overheard your entire conversation with Roderick, Sarah wrote. I knew the plan. I knew you would position yourself to intercept my body. So I made sure to survive the fall and land exactly where you expected a corpse to wash up. Why? Kaelan asked. Why not simply disappear? Flee to the freehold as you originally planned? Sarah wrote carefully. Because I realized something while listening to you plot. The freehold colonies are not safe. If you and Roderick are willing to manufacture a war to destroy them, they will fall. Within a year, maybe 2. Every refugee who flees there will be caught in the massacre. So running there would only delay my death, not prevent it. She paused, then continued writing. Better to be captured by you, learn your weaknesses, find leverage, and eventually escape to somewhere you cannot follow. Your conspiracy told me the shape of the board. I simply chose to play the game. Kaelan stared at her for a long moment. Then slowly he began to laugh. It was not a cruel sound, not mocking, but genuine amusement mixed with something that might have been respect. I brought you here thinking you were a useful tool, he said. Turns out I captured a player. That changes things considerably. He stood, walked to the window, and looked out at the forest beyond. The morning sun caught the silver threading through his dark hair, made his shadow stretch long across the floor. Third question, he said without turning. If I gave you access to Iron Pine's supply maps, their guard rotations, their strategic vulnerabilities, where would you strike? Sarah wrote without hesitation. I would not strike at all. I would infiltrate. The Omega dens are connected to the fortress by service tunnels. Original builders included them as escape routes. Roderick does not defend them because he does not value what they contain. Get 12 skilled fighters through those tunnels, and you could take the weapons vault, the grain stores, and the war room before anyone knew you were inside the walls. Kaelan turned back to face her. His expression was no longer that of a captor looking at a prisoner. It was the look of a commander recognizing a fellow strategist. Show me, he said. For the next 3 hours, Sarah drew maps from memory. The layout of Iron Pine Hold, the positions of guard posts, the rotation schedules that left blind spots at dawn and dusk, the locations of supply caches, the tunnels that connected the Omega quarters to the main fortress. Kaelan's war council joined them. His beta, a man named Davrin with gray streaking his dark beard and eyes the color of forged steel. His gamma, a younger warrior called Theron, whose scarred hands and flat gaze spoke of a life spent in combat. They listened as Kaelan translated Sarah's written notes, asked clarifying questions that she answered with additional sketches and diagrams. And slowly, grudgingly, she felt their respect shift. They had entered the room looking at her as a curiosity, a rescued Omega who might have some minor intelligence value. They left looking at her as something else entirely. After they departed, Kaelan remained. He studied the maps she had drawn, his fingers tracing the routes she had marked. "Your suggestion about the tunnels," he said quietly. "That changes my entire strategic approach. I was planning a conventional siege, weeks of attrition, high casualties on both sides. This cuts that to days, maybe less." "You are welcome," Sarah wrote. Kaelan looked at her. "I meant what I said earlier, about your options. You can leave whenever you wish. I will provide escort, supplies, safe passage to any territory, but I would prefer you stay. As an advisor, with rank and authority, a voice in strategic decisions." "Why?" Sarah wrote. "Why offer me power instead of simply extracting what I know and disposing of me?" "Because," Kaelan said, "disposing of valuable assets is a waste, and because keeping you locked in a comfortable room is also a waste. You are wasted on obedience. You are built for strategy, for command, for the kind of ruthless clarity that wins wars." He moved to the door, then paused. "Tomorrow, I am holding a war council, the full assembly. Every commander, every senior warrior, every advisor who has a say in how we proceed against Ironpine. You will attend, not as a prisoner, not as a curiosity, but as the person who knows their territory better than anyone in this room." "What if they refuse to listen to me?" Sarah wrote. "Then I will make them listen," Kaelan said. "You have proven your value to me. Now you will prove it to them. And if you succeed, if you can earn their respect the way you have begun to earn mine, then we will discuss making your position here permanent, with all the protections and privileges that entails." He left before she could respond. The door remained unlocked. Sarah stared at the open doorway for a long time. This was the next stage of the manipulation, the illusion of freedom, the offer of status, all designed to bind her more securely than any chains. But it was also an opportunity. If she attended this war council, she would see the full extent of Kaelan's forces, learn the names and capabilities of his commanders, understand the political dynamics of his court, information she could use, leverage she could build. And if she earned their respect, earned her position as an advisor, she would have access to resources, to intelligence, to the tools she needed to eventually escape not just this fortress, but this entire region. Kaelan thought he was recruiting her, thought he was turning her captivity into willing service. He had no idea she was recruiting him right back. The War Council convened the next morning in a circular chamber at the heart of the keep. The room was ancient, its stone walls covered with faded tapestries depicting battles from centuries past. A massive table dominated the center, carved from a single enormous tree and worn smooth by the passage of countless hands. Sarah entered with Kaelan, and the conversation died. 20 pairs of eyes turned to assess her, warriors in leather and steel, advisors in the dark robes of scholars, a handful of women, rare among the assembled company, who looked at her with expressions ranging from curiosity to outright hostility. "This," Kaelan announced without preamble, "is Sarah Ashford. She lived among the Ironpine Pack for 23 years. She has intimate knowledge of their fortress, their tactics, and their vulnerabilities. She will be advising us on the coming operation. You will treat her counsel with the same respect you would give any senior strategist." A ripple of reaction moved through the room. Not quite mutiny, but clear discomfort. A gray-haired woman with scars crisscrossing her arms spoke first. "She is Omega, wolfless. How can we trust intelligence from someone who could not even earn standing in her birth pack?" Sarah felt the familiar sting of those words, but Kaelan's response was swift and cold. "Commander Vera," he said, addressing the woman directly. Sarah survived a 300-foot fall through strategic planning. She mapped tidal patterns and ocean currents well enough to calculate a precise landing point in complete darkness. She then killed a beta with nothing but a river stone and determination. If you believe those achievements indicate lack of capability, then perhaps your own judgment requires examination. The room went very quiet. Vera's jaw tightened, but she inclined her head in grudging acknowledgement. "Now," Kaelan continued, "we have a choice. We can waste time debating whether someone who outmaneuvered 2 alphas is qualified to offer tactical advice, or we can listen to what she has to say and decide based on the merit of her intelligence. I prefer the latter." He turned to Sarah. "Show them." Sarah moved to the table. Someone had already spread out a large map of the Northern Territories. Iron Pine lands occupied the northeastern quadrant, a sprawling mass of forest and coastline. She picked up a piece of charcoal and began to mark locations with quick, confident strokes. The first mark indicated the Omega dens. These tunnels, she wrote on a slate that Davern held up for the room to read, connect directly to the main fortress. They are unguarded because Roderick believes nothing of value resides in the Omega quarters. That is his weakness, overconfidence born from prejudice. She marked 3 more points: the weapons vault, the grain stores, the war room, all accessible through the tunnel system. A team of 12 could infiltrate at dawn when guard rotations shift. Minimal casualties, maximum disruption. Theron, the scarred warrior, leaned forward. "How do you know the guard rotations?" "Because I scrubbed floors outside the guard barracks for 5 years," Sarah wrote. "I memorized their patterns, when they slept, when they trained, when they were drunk or distracted or too exhausted to pay attention. You learn things when people think you are beneath notice." Another commander, this one younger with keen dark eyes, spoke up. "Even if we get inside, Roderick will sound the alarm the moment we are discovered. We would be trapped in their fortress with their entire pack converging." Sarah wrote rapidly. "Not if you time it correctly. Dawn is when the night guards end their shift and the day guards are still groggy. There is a 20-minute window where the fortress is at minimum alertness. Strike then. Take the war room first. Kill or capture whoever is inside. Use their own strategic command to create chaos in their response." She continued marking the map, explaining each point with written notes that Davern translated. By the time she finished, the table was covered with information: vulnerabilities, timing, contingencies. The room had gone from hostile skepticism to focused attention. These were warriors. They understood tactics. And what Sarah was offering was brilliant in its simplicity. Use the enemy's own prejudices against them. Turn their fortress into a trap of their own making. Commander Vera spoke again, her tone less hostile now. "This could work, but it requires someone who knows those tunnels intimately, someone who can guide the infiltration team without error." Sarah wrote, "I will guide them." The room erupted, 6 voices speaking at once, protests about sending an Omega into combat, questions about her physical capability, concerns about loyalty. Kaelan raised one hand, and stillness fell immediately. "Sarah has earned the right to volunteer. If she wishes to accompany the mission, she will. But," he turned to look at her directly, "you will stay with me. No forward position, no direct combat unless absolutely necessary. Your value is intelligence and guidance, not heroics." It was the right calculation, protective enough to ease concerns about sending a wolfless woman into danger, but not so protective as to undermine her credibility. Sarah nodded her agreement. The rest of the council meeting was devoted to logistics, team selection, equipment, fallback positions. Sarah contributed where she could, writing notes and answering questions. By the end, she had been integrated into the planning process so thoroughly that several commanders were directing questions to her before they thought to ask Kaelan. As the assembly dispersed, Davern approached her. His expression was thoughtful. "You fought for this, for the right to risk your life helping us destroy the pack that threw you away." "Why?" Sarah wrote slowly, choosing her words with care. "Because doing nothing would mean they won. They wanted me erased, made irrelevant. Proving them wrong is worth the risk." Davern studied the message, then nodded. "I understand that kind of anger. Just be sure it does not consume you before you get your revenge." He left. Sarah stood alone in the war room, surrounded by maps and battle plans. Through the high windows, she could see the sun beginning its descent toward the western horizon. The thought should have brought satisfaction. Instead, it brought only a cold, hollow feeling in her chest. Revenge was supposed to be sweet, but all she tasted was ashes. Kaelan found her there an hour later, still staring at the maps. "You are having second thoughts," he observed. Sarah shook her head. Then, after a moment, she picked up the charcoal and wrote on the table itself. "Not second thoughts. Just realizing that revenge is not the same as justice, and neither one will give me back the 23 years they stole." "No," Kaelan agreed. "Nothing will give you that time back. But you can determine what the next 23 years look like. That is not nothing." He moved to stand beside her, looking down at the maps with their marks and notations. "I told you yesterday that you were built for strategy, for command. I meant it. After Iron Pine falls, there will be territory to govern. refugees to integrate, a new order to establish. That work requires people who understand what it means to be powerless, people who can build systems that protect rather than exploit. He turned to look at her. Stay. Not as my prisoner, not even as my advisor, as my partner in this work. Sarah stared at him, trying to determine if this was another manipulation, another layer of the trap. I know you do not trust me, Kaelan continued. I have given you no reason to, but trust can be built, over time, through action rather than words. Let me prove that I mean what I say. Before Sarah could respond, before she could write a question or a refusal, the door to the war room burst open. A guard, breathing hard, stumbled in. His face was pale. My king. Iron Pine forces. On the southern border. Alpha Roderick himself is leading them. He demands you return his property or face war. Kaelan's entire demeanor changed in an instant. The thoughtful advisor vanished, replaced by the warrior king. How many? 50, maybe more. The guard swallowed hard. They are preparing to cross into our territory. They will reach the fortress by nightfall. Kaelan turned to Sarah. It seems your former Alpha is less patient than I anticipated. He moved toward the door, already calling orders. Davrin, Theron, mobilize the garrison, full defensive positions. I want archers on every wall and the gate reinforced. He paused, looked back at Sarah. Stay here. You are safest in the keep. Then he was gone, running down the corridor with the guard, shouting commands that echoed off the stone walls. Sarah stood alone in the war room. Around her, she could hear the fortress coming to life, the clang of steel, the thunder of boots on stone. Roderick had come for her, not in days when they would have been ready. Now, while Kaelan's forces were dispersed, while the advantage of surprise still belonged to Iron Pine. She looked down at the maps on the table, at the careful plans she had helped create, all of it useless now, all of it overridden by the simple fact that her former Alpha had decided to take back what he considered his property by force. Sarah touched the charcoal marks she had made, the tunnels, the vulnerabilities, the precise locations where Iron Pine could be hurt most. She had given Kaelan the keys to destroying Roderick. Now Roderick was bringing the war to them. And Sarah stood in this middle, belonging to neither side, trusted by neither, valuable to both for reasons that had nothing to do with who she was and everything to do with what she knew. The old woman's warning echoed in her memory. He tests loyalty through survival. Those who endure earn place. Sarah picked up the slate, wrote a single word. Then she left the war room and went to find Kaelan. She found him on the battlements, his hands braced against the stone as he stared out at the forest to the south. Below, in the courtyard, his warriors were assembling in formation. Above, the sky was beginning to darken toward evening, and in the distance, barely visible through the trees, she could see movement. The shimmer of steel, the dark mass of an approaching force. Kaelan did not turn when she approached. I told you to stay inside. Sarah moved to stand beside him, held up the slate so he could read what she had written. I can end this without bloodshed. Now he looked at her. How? Sarah erased the slate and wrote quickly. Roderick wants me. His entire justification for this attack is that you stole his property. Give me back. Let me walk out those gates. He gets what he came for. You avoid a battle you are not prepared to fight. Everyone wins. Except you, Kaelan said flatly. He will kill you the moment you are back in his territory. Probably, Sarah wrote. But that is not your problem. You said I could leave whenever I wanted. I want to leave now. Kaelan grabbed her wrist, not roughly, but firmly enough that she could not pull away. You think I saved you from one execution just to hand you over to another? You think I am that pragmatic? You said yourself I was an investment, Sarah wrote with her free hand. Sometimes investments have to be liquidated to prevent larger losses. This is one of those times. She met his eyes. Let me go. No, Kaelan said. The single word was absolute, final. I will not. Then people will die for me, Sarah wrote. Your people. Because you decided I was worth keeping. How is that different from Roderick deciding I was worth killing? Both choices treat me as an object, a thing to be used or disposed of according to your needs. The words hit harder than she had intended. She saw Kaelan flinch, saw something shift behind his amber gaze, not pain, but perhaps recognition of an uncomfortable truth. You are not an object, he said quietly, and I am not Roderick. I do not keep you because you are useful. I keep you because throwing you back to the wolves would be unconscionable. Then what do you suggest? Sarah wrote, because in about 2 hours, Roderick will reach these walls, and when he does, people will die. Maybe not many, maybe just a few, but some. And every death will be because of me, because I am here instead of there. Kaelan released her wrist, turned back to stare at the approaching army. We defend, we hold the walls, and if Roderick wants war, we give him one he did not expect. He looked at her again. But we do it my way, using your intelligence, your strategy. You showed my commanders how to destroy Iron Pine from within. Now show me how to defend Stormcrown from without. It was a test, a challenge, an offer of partnership disguised as a command. Sarah looked out at the forest, at the dark shapes moving between the trees, at the future rushing toward them like a storm front. She thought about the old woman's warning, about the note that said trust actions, not words, about the very real possibility that everything Kaelan had offered was manipulation, designed to secure her cooperation. But she also thought about Davrin's question, about whether her anger would consume her before she got her revenge, about whether revenge was even what she wanted anymore. She picked up the charcoal, began to write on the slate, not an answer to Kaelan's challenge, but a plan that would change everything. The plan Sarah wrote on that slate, with Roderick's army bearing down and the sun bleeding toward the horizon, was audacious. Kaelan read it twice, his expression shifting from disbelief to calculation to something that might have been admiration. "You want to do what?" he asked. Sarah erased the slate and wrote again, more carefully this time, breaking it into steps so he could see the logic. Roderick expects a siege, expects you to hide behind walls and force him to commit to an extended assault. That gives him time. Time to consolidate position. Time to call for reinforcements from allied packs. Time to turn this into the war he wants. She paused, added more. But if I walk out under a flag of parley, if I offer to return voluntarily in exchange for his immediate withdrawal, he has to respond. His entire justification for being here is that you stole his property. If I come back willingly, he looks like he won. His pride is satisfied. He leaves. "And then?" Kaelan asked, his voice carefully neutral. Sarah's charcoal moved quickly. "Then your extraction team moves immediately. Not in 3 days. Tonight, as soon as Roderick's guard is down, you shadow the march back to Iron Pine. Strike at dawn when they arrive exhausted. I create a distraction from inside. Your warriors execute the tunnel infiltration we planned. Roderick falls before he even realizes what happened." Kaelan stared at the words, at the audacity of the proposal. "You want me to let you go back, to trust that you will not simply accept your fate, to believe you can signal us at exactly the right moment." Sarah met his eyes, wrote one more line. "You said I was built for strategy. Prove you meant it." Understanding dawned in Kaelan's face. This was not surrender. This was the opening move in a coordinated assault, using herself as bait to draw Roderick into complacency while Stormcrown forces positioned for a killing blow. It was brilliant, it was insane, and it might actually work. Kaelan turned away from the battlements, began pacing. His mind worked through the variables, the risks, the potential outcomes. Davrin had joined them at some point, reading over Kaelan's shoulder, his expression grave. "She is right about the tactical advantage," Davrin said quietly. "Roderick came here expecting confrontation, bloodshed, a clear demonstration of his power. If we give him a diplomatic victory instead, he has no justification for escalation. And if we strike while he thinks he has won, the psychological impact alone could shatter his pack's morale, which requires perfect timing," Kaelan said, "and requires her to survive long enough to create the distraction." Sarah wrote, "I survived a cliff fall by calculating timing. I can survive this." Kaelan stopped pacing, looked at her. "You understand what you are proposing. The risk. If something goes wrong, if Roderick decides to make an example of you immediately, there may not be time for extraction." Sarah nodded, wrote, "I understand, but this is my choice, my risk to take. You said I could leave whenever I wanted. I am choosing to leave in a way that serves both our interests." "That is not why you are doing this," Kaelan said. His voice was quiet, too perceptive. "You are doing this because you do not want to be the reason people die tonight, because the thought of warriors bleeding for you is intolerable." He was right. Sarah could not deny it even if she wanted to. The weight of potential deaths, of violence committed in her name, pressed against her chest like a physical thing. Kaelan moved closer, close enough that she could see the weariness in his face, the weight of command. "I will agree to this plan on one condition. You take a weapon, a blade, small enough to hide but large enough to be effective. And if Roderick tries to execute you before the extraction, you use it. You fight. You make enough noise that my team knows to move immediately." Sarah considered, then nodded and wrote, "Agreed." "Davrin," Kaelan said without looking away from Sarah, "prepare an extraction team, 12 of our best. They shadow Iron Pine's return march at distance, position at the tunnel entrance Sarah marked. Dawn tomorrow. The moment she signals, they move." "My king," Davrin began. The hesitation in his voice was clear. "Are we certain this is wise? We barely know her." "Then we will learn whether my judgment is sound," Kaelan said flatly. "She killed Garrett Stone with a river rock, Davrin, survived impossible odds through planning. Does that sound like someone who will meekly accept death?" Davrin's expression remained skeptical, but he nodded. "As you command." He left to make preparations. Kaelan and Sarah remained on the battlements, the dying light painting everything in shades of amber and rust. "I will send word to Roderick that you wish to parley," Kaelan said. "That you are returning of your own volition and request safe conduct to the border. He will agree. His pride will demand it." Sarah wrote without looking at him. "What if I fail?" "Then I will burn Iron Pine to the ground," Kaelan said. His voice was soft but absolutely certain. "And I will make Roderick answer for it." Sarah turned to look at him, trying to determine if it was a threat or a promise or something else entirely. "You are not a tool to me," Kaelan continued. "Perhaps you were when I first pulled you from the water, but watching you dismantle my commander's skepticism with nothing but intelligence and determination changed that calculation." He met her gaze. "Come back. Not because I need your intelligence. Come back because you deserve to see Roderick fall." The words should have made her angry, should have reinforced the idea that she was still just an asset. But there was something in his voice, something that suggested the protection was not purely strategic. She did not know what to do with that, did not have time to examine it, so she simply nodded and began walking toward the stairs. "Sarah," Kaelan called after her. She turned. "When this is over," he said, "we will discuss what partnership actually means, not as captor and prisoner, but as equals." He paused. "If you still want that." Sarah held his gaze for a long moment. Then she nodded once more and descended into the fortress to prepare for her return to the place that had tried to kill her. The meeting happened at the border between Stormcrown and Iron Pine territory, a stretch of open ground where the forest thinned and a river marked the boundary between kingdoms. Roderick waited on the far side with 20 of his best warriors, their tension palpable even at a distance. Kaelan stood on the near side with an equal number. Davrin was at his right hand, Theron at his left. And Sarah walked between them, her head high and her hands empty except for the small knife hidden in the sleeve of her tunic. They met in the middle, in the shallow water where the river ran over smooth stones. The sound of it was a constant presence, a reminder that nature cared nothing for the conflicts of wolves and men. Roderick looked older than Sarah remembered from weeks past, harder. His gray fur seemed to have spread further across his shoulders, and there were new lines carved into his face by stress and time. But his eyes were the same, cold, calculating, certain of his right to determine who lived and who served and who died. "Thornwick," he said. His voice was a growl even in human form. "You test the bounds of our treaty, steal from me, shelter my property, and now you dare meet me as if we stand on equal ground." "I test nothing," Kaelan replied. His tone was measured, diplomatic. "The woman came to my shores, half-drowned. I granted her shelter as any leader would, but she has expressed a desire to return to Iron Pine lands. I am merely facilitating her choice." Roderick's gaze found Sarah, traveled over her with an expression of contempt barely contained. "You choose to return? After what you did?" Sarah said nothing, showed nothing. Let the wordlessness speak for itself. "She has no voice," Kaelan said, "but she has made her intentions clear. She will return with you. In exchange, you withdraw your forces, and we consider this matter closed. No war, no bloodshed, no violation of treaty." Roderick's smile was all teeth. "How generous. You steal from me and then offer to return what was always mine." He stepped closer to Sarah, close enough that she could smell the violence on him, the barely leashed fury. "You humiliated Garrett, made him a laughingstock before the entire pack. For that alone you deserve punishment." He grabbed her arm, not gently, hard enough that she felt the bones grind together. "You will return, you will submit, and you will serve as an example of what happens to broken things that forget their place." Sarah kept her face blank, let him see what he expected. A creature defeated, resigned to her fate, exactly the performance she needed to give. "We have an agreement then," Kaelan said. "She returns to Iron Pine. You withdraw your forces, and our treaty remains intact." "Agreed," Roderick said. He turned and began dragging Sarah back across the river toward his waiting warriors. Toward the cage she had escaped. Sarah did not look back. Did not give Kaelan or anyone on the Stormcrown side any indication of doubt. She walked with her head high and her wordlessness absolute. Behind her, she heard Kaelan give the order to stand down, heard his warriors beginning to withdraw. The sound of them faded as Roderick's wolves closed around her, a living wall of fur and muscle and barely contained hostility. Garrett was waiting among them. His face was healed, but the scratches Sarah had given him were still visible, faint pink lines that marked him. He looked at her with an expression of such pure hatred that it was almost physical. "Welcome home," he said. His voice was soft, poisonous. "I have been planning your return." Roderick released her arm and shoved her toward Garrett. "Bind her. We march through the night. I want her back in Iron Pine Hold before dawn." Garrett pulled rough hemp rope from his belt and began wrapping it around Sarah's wrists. He pulled it tighter than necessary, tight enough that the fibers bit into her skin. His breath was hot against her ear as he worked. "You thought you were clever," he whispered. "Thought jumping from that cliff would save you. But all you did was delay." Sarah said nothing, showed nothing. Let him have his moment of victory. Let them all think they had won. The march back to Iron Pine took 8 hours. They did not stop to rest, did not slow their pace. Roderick drove them hard, pushing through darkness and rough terrain with the single-minded determination of a man who needed to reassert his dominance. Sarah stumbled more than once. Her feet were cut and bleeding. Her muscles screamed from exhaustion. But she did not fall, did not give them the satisfaction of seeing her break. She focused on counting steps, on memorizing landmarks, on noting every detail that might be useful later. Garrett walked behind her the entire time, close enough that she could feel his presence like a weight. Every time she slowed, he would shove her forward. Every time she caught her breath, he would make some comment about what awaited her. She ignored him, ignored all of them. Retreated into the wordless place inside her mind where she had lived for years, the place where she was safe, where they could not touch her. Dawn was breaking when they finally reached Iron Pine Hold. The fortress looked exactly as it had when she left. The same walls, the same guards, but somehow smaller, less imposing. A handful of days in Stormcrown had recalibrated her sense of what power actually looked like. Roderick led them through the gates and directly to the Great Hall. The pack was already assembled. They must have been roused from sleep and told to gather, 200 wolves filling the space with their presence, their anticipation of violence. Sarah was forced to her knees in the center of the floor, the same spot where she had knelt weeks ago to receive her original death sentence. The hemp rope around her wrists cut deeper. Blood trickled down her hands and dripped onto the packed earth. Roderick took his position on the dais. His mate stood beside him, cold and silent. "Sarah Ashford returns," Roderick announced. His voice filled the hall. The defective Omega who thought she could escape pack justice, who thought she could find sanctuary with our enemies. She returns now to face the consequences of her defiance. The pack murmured, a low growl of approval. They wanted blood, wanted an example. Garrett stepped forward. "Alpha, I request the right to claim her, to take her as mate and correct her deficiencies through discipline. She owes me blood debt for the injuries she caused." Roderick considered, looked down at Sarah. "What say you, Omega? Will you accept Garrett Stone as mate? Will you submit to pack judgment?" Sarah said nothing. "She has no voice," someone called from the crowd. "How can she accept or refuse?" Roderick smiled. "Then let her actions speak. If she submits, if she bows her head and shows proper remorse, I will grant Garrett's request. If she continues her defiance, the original sentence stands." He gestured. 2 guards moved forward and hauled Sarah to her feet. They held her arms while Garrett approached. He moved slowly, taking his time, savoring the moment. When he reached her, he put one hand under her chin and forced her head up. "Bow," he said. "Show us you have learned." Sarah stared at him, through him. Let him see nothing but flat, empty defiance. Garrett's hand tightened. His fingers dug into her jaw hard enough to bruise. "I said bow." Still, Sarah did nothing. Garrett's other hand came up, drew back, prepared to strike. The blow never landed. Instead, the massive doors to the great hall exploded inward, wood splintering, iron hinges screaming, and through the opening poured wolves, not iron pine wolves, storm-crowned warriors in dark leather and steel, moving with lethal precision. At their head was Kaelan Thornwick, his features sharpened with the wolf at the surface, and the sound he made was not quite human. It was the roar of an alpha protecting what was his. The hall erupted into chaos. Iron pine warriors shifting, lunging for the invaders, steel meeting claw, fur meeting flesh, blood on the packed earth floor. But Kaelan's forces were not there to fight the pack. They were there for one target. They cut through the chaos like a blade, 12 warriors moving as one unit, heading directly for the center of the hall, for Sarah. Garrett realized the danger a second too late. He grabbed for Sarah, trying to use her as a shield. But she was faster. The small knife Kaelan had given her slipped from her sleeve into her hand, and she drove it upward, under Garrett's ribs, into the soft tissue where his wolf could not protect him. He made a sound, shock and pain and disbelief. His grip on her loosened. She twisted away as he fell. Kaelan reached her then. His hands were on her shoulders, searching her face for injury. "Are you hurt?" Sarah shook her head, then held up her bound wrists. He cut the ropes with a single slash of his claws. The hemp fell away. Blood rushed back into her hands in a wave of pain. "Can you run?" he asked. Sarah nodded. "Then run." They ran, out of the great hall, through corridors Sarah knew by heart, toward the servants' entrance that opened onto the eastern wall. Behind them she could hear Roderick roaring orders, could hear the pack giving chase. But Kaelan's warriors had done their job, created enough chaos to buy them time. They burst through the servants' door and into the gray dawn light. Kaelan's extraction team was waiting. Horses, fast ones bred for endurance, already moving before they were fully mounted. Sarah found herself pulled up behind Davron. His horse lunged forward, following Kaelan's mount, racing toward the tree line and the border beyond. Behind them, iron pine warriors were pouring from every gate, shifting into wolf form, giving chase. But they were too late. Kaelan's people had timed it perfectly, had struck at the moment of maximum confusion, had executed the extraction with military precision. They crossed the border into storm-crowned territory, with iron pine wolves still howling in fury behind them. The sound faded as they put distance between themselves and their pursuers. Eventually there was only the thunder of hooves and the ragged sound of breathing. They did not stop until they reached a clearing deep in storm-crowned forest, a place where scouts had already prepared supplies, fresh mounts, clean water, bandages for the wounded. Sarah slid from Davron's horse, her legs nearly buckled. Davron caught her, steadied her. His face was grim, but there was respect in his eyes. "The knife strike was the signal," he said. "That was how we knew you were ready." Sarah nodded. The plan had worked. She had drawn Roderick's attention, had made him think he had won, and then she had signaled Kaelan's forces at the precise moment when they could strike with maximum effect. Kaelan approached. He had shifted back to human form. There was blood on his hands, not his own. His expression was thunderous. "You were not supposed to engage Garrett directly," he said. The anger in his voice was barely contained. "You were supposed to create a distraction and let my warriors handle the extraction." Sarah picked up a stick and began writing in the dirt. "I saw an opportunity. Took it. Garrett was distracted. Easy target. One less problem." "That was not the plan," Kaelan said. "Plans change," Sarah wrote. "Adapt or die." For a moment she thought he might actually strike her. The fury in his face was that intense. But then slowly it began to shift, the anger bleeding into something else, something that might have been admiration mixed with exasperation. "You are going to be the death of me," he said. Sarah wrote, "Better me than Roderick." Despite himself, Kaelan laughed. It was a short, sharp sound, but genuine. He scrubbed a hand over his face. "You killed Garrett." "Yes," Sarah wrote. "Good," Kaelan said. "He was a problem that needed solving." Sarah looked at him sharply, wrote, "You knew he was dangerous?" Kaelan's expression went carefully neutral. Garrett Stone was useful once, as a source of intelligence about Iron Pine's internal dynamics. But he became unstable, obsessive. His fixation on you was a liability I could not control. He paused. "When you killed him at the river weeks ago, I thought the problem solved, that he had drowned. Learning he survived was an unpleasant surprise." "So you used me as bait," Sarah wrote. "I used the situation as it presented itself," Kaelan corrected. Just as you did. We are more alike than you want to admit. The return to Stormcrown Fortress was swift. News of the extraction had spread. Warriors lined the battlements, their expressions a mixture of relief and excitement. They had struck at Iron Pine and escaped without losses. But Sarah felt no triumph, only exhaustion. The adrenaline that had sustained her through the march and the confrontation and the escape was draining away, leaving her hollow. Kaelan noticed. He always seemed to notice. He gave orders for the warriors to stand down, and then he personally escorted Sarah not to the guest chamber she had occupied before, but to his own quarters. The room was larger, dominated by a massive bed and a desk covered in maps. It smelled of him, storm and stone and that peculiar electric quality. "You need rest," he said, "real rest." "I can return to my own room," Sarah wrote. Kaelan shook his head. "That room has a lock on the outside. This one does not. You are not a prisoner anymore, Sarah. You are Pack, if you choose to be." Sarah stared at him, at the offer implicit in those words, not just safety, but belonging. "I will consider your offer," she wrote, "after I sleep." "Fair enough," Kaelan said. He moved toward the door, then stopped. "For what it is worth, you were right. About Garrett, about Roderick, about all of it. Your intelligence was flawless, your strategy was brilliant, and your execution," he smiled slightly, "was literally perfect." He left. The door closed behind him with a soft click, and this time there was no sound of a lock turning. Sarah stood in the center of Kaelan Thornwick's personal chambers, alone, exhausted, free. She moved to the bed, sat on the edge. The furs were soft beneath her hands. The mattress yielded under her weight. She lay back, stared at the ceiling, and for the first time since her mother died, Sarah Ashford allowed herself to cry. Not from pain, not from fear, but from the overwhelming relief of surviving one more impossible thing. When she woke hours later, sunlight was streaming through the windows. The old woman was sitting in a chair by the fire, the same servant who had passed her the warning note. The woman saw her wake, stood, approached the bed with measured grace. Sarah sat up, her body ached, but the sleep had helped. The old woman held out a bundle of clothes, clean, well made. She set them on the bed. Then, from her pocket, she pulled another note. Sarah unfolded it. "Read the message. You lived, most do not. The king tests loyalty through survival. You passed. What comes next is harder. Building is always harder than surviving." Sarah looked up. The woman's face was still unreadable, but there was something in her eyes, recognition. Sarah found the charcoal on Kaelan's desk, wrote on the back of the note, "Who are you?" The woman took the charcoal, wrote beneath Sarah's question, "My name is Marna. I was Pack once, before the king's uncle killed my mate. When Kaelan took the throne, he offered me freedom. I chose to stay, to serve, to remember, and to help the ones he collects survive the collection." Sarah read the message twice, then wrote, "Am I safe here?" Marna considered, wrote slowly, "Safer than Iron Pine, but safety is negotiated daily. The king is not cruel, but he is strategic. Make yourself indispensable, trust slowly, and remember that every gift comes with expectations." Then she was gone, taking both notes with her. Sarah dressed in the clothes Marna had provided, washed her face, and then she went to find Kaelan. She found him in the war room, bent over maps with Davrin and Theron, planning the next move. Kaelan looked up when she entered. "You should be resting." Sarah moved to the table, picked up charcoal, began marking the maps. "We need to strike Iron Pine within days," she wrote, "while Roderick is still recovering from the humiliation, while his pack questions his competence." The three men stared at her, then at the marks she had made. "You want to invade now?" Davrin asked. Sarah pointed to a mark on the eastern side. "The old quarry, abandoned for decades, connects to the fortress through mining tunnels. I found them when I was 12. Get 20 warriors through there, and you emerge directly beneath the armory." "How do you know they are still passable?" Theron asked. "Because I used them 3 months ago," Sarah wrote. Kaelan leaned over the map. "This changes everything." "Yes," Sarah wrote, "but it requires speed. We have days, maybe less." Kaelan straightened. "We move in 4 days. Davrin, begin selecting the assault team." Both men nodded and left, leaving Sarah alone with Kaelan. "You did not have to give me this," he said. "You could have kept that information for yourself." "I know," Sarah wrote. "So why?" She wrote carefully, "Because you kept your word. You came for me. That matters." Kaelan moved around the table, stopped directly in front of her. I need you to understand something. I did not save you to use you. I saved you because my mother was wolfless. She married into pack life and spent 20 years being treated as inferior. When my uncle took power and started purging anyone he deemed weak, she was first. I was 12. By 17, I had killed him and taken his throne. Sarah stared at him, seeing him fully for the first time. "That is why you protect wolfless refugees," she wrote. "Yes," Kaelan said, "because I know what it is to be deemed less than, and I refuse to build a kingdom on those foundations." "What are you building?" Sarah wrote. "Something better," Kaelan said. "Something that measures worth by competence rather than bloodline. It will not be perfect, but it will be more just." He looked at her steadily. "And I would like you to help me build it, as an equal partner." "I need time," she wrote, "to understand what partnership means." "Take the time you need," Kaelan said. 4 days later, Sarah Ashford led 20 of Stormcrown's best warriors through the forgotten quarry tunnels beneath Iron Pine Hold. She navigated by memory and instinct. They emerged in the armory exactly as she had promised, took control of the weapons, secured the war room, opened the main gates from inside. Kaelan's primary force poured through. Roderick tried to rally his pack, but he was fighting chaos on multiple fronts. The final confrontation happened in the Great Hall. Roderick, wounded and cornered, faced Kaelan with what remained of his guard. "You have no right," Roderick snarled. "No authority here." "I have every right," Kaelan replied. "You conspired to manufacture a war, attempted to execute an innocent woman, failed to protect your own people. By pack law, I claim these lands through conquest." Roderick looked past Kaelan, found Sarah standing among the warriors. "You, a broken Omega, destroyed my hold." "No," Sarah wrote on her slate. Davrin held it up. "You destroyed your own hold. I simply showed everyone what you refused to see. That discarding people because they do not fit your definition of worth is how kingdoms fall." Roderick lunged, a final attempt to reach her. He did not make it 3 steps. Kaelan moved between them, and the Alpha King's claws found Roderick's throat. It was over in seconds. In the aftermath, Kaelan offered Iron Pine wolves a choice. Join or leave. Most stayed. The hold was his. Days later, Sarah stood in the garden that had once been the Grove of Judgment. Kaelan had ordered it transformed. The heart tree remained, but the poisonous plants were gone, replaced with herbs of healing. It was her project, her design, a symbol of what justice could look like. "The council wants to formalize your position," Kaelan said, finding her among the plants. "Give you authority over territorial governance. They call you the Silent Queen." Sarah wiped dirt from her hands, picked up her slate. "What do you want?" "A partner who tells me when I am wrong," Kaelan said. "Who builds when I am too focused on fighting." He smiled. "Turns out that is you," Sarah wrote. "I am barely functional." "You organized the integration of 200 wolves without incident," Kaelan said. "You designed a justice system that reduced conflicts by 70%. You created trade agreements with the freehold. Stop telling yourself you are not enough." Sarah looked at him, at the man who had saved her, who had trusted her strategy, who had offered partnership and delivered. She wrote one word, "Yes." "Yes to the title?" Kaelan asked, "or yes to something else?" Sarah erased the slate, wrote more carefully. "Yes to partnership, yes to building something better, yes to staying, and yes to admitting you were right. This is better than revenge." Kaelan extended his hand, not to pull her up, just to offer connection. Sarah looked at his hand, at the scars on his knuckles. Then she placed her dirt-stained hand in his. He pulled her gently to her feet. They stood there, 2 people who had survived impossible things, who had chosen to build rather than destroy. "You know," Kaelan said, "you still have not spoken aloud since that first cry on the cliff." Sarah smiled, wrote, "I am saving my voice for when it truly matters. For now, this works." "It is enough for me too," Kaelan said. They stood together in the garden that had been a place of judgment and was now a place of healing. In the territory that had been divided and was now unified, Sarah Ashford had fallen from a cliff to escape a cage, and she had landed in the arms of a king who saw not a broken thing, but a woman who had been waiting for the right moment to become who she was always meant to be. A survivor, a strategist, a queen. Not because someone gave her a crown, but because she built her throne one decision at a time. And when she looked out at the kingdom she had helped create, she did not see a cage. She saw a canvas, still being painted, still becoming something none of them could have imagined. She saw possibility. She saw future. She saw home. And for the first time in 23 years, Sarah Ashford felt like she belonged somewhere, Not because she was owned, but because she had chosen, and her choice had been honored. That made all the difference.